If it's your first time coming to Australia, whether it is to visit or to live here, and are feeling excited but at the same time a bit nervous about your trip, don't worry, because in this video we're going to talk about common mistakes people make during their trip to Australia so you don't make them yourself and have the best trip of your lifetime. So if you're interested, keep watching. One of the biggest mistakes people make when they come to Australia is that they only visit Sydney. And while this is a beautiful city and a must-see destination for sure, the reality is that there's much more to Australia than Sydney. From the natural beauty of the Great Barrier Reef, Uluru and parts of Western Australia, to the cultural experiences of Melbourne and Tasmania. So if you're coming all the way to Australia and you've allocated enough time for your trip, I highly recommend considering taking advantage of budget airlines or road trips to explore different cities and regions. This way you'll gain a deeper appreciation of this beautiful country. Now, having said that, having unrealistic itineraries and not allocating enough days to explore is another mistake many people make when coming to Australia, because they don't realize that this is a huge country and that distances between cities can be very long. So I highly recommend prioritizing your must-see destinations and activities to make sure you have plenty of time to fully experience each place, and allocating a minimum of 2 weeks for your trip. Shorter than that and you'll barely have time to recover from jet lag. Another pretty big mistake many people make when coming to Australia for a visit or to live here is that they drive without the proper documentation. If you're planning to drive here in Australia, you must bring your overseas driver's license, which should be in English, because if you don't have a valid license or if it's not translated into English, you can get in a lot of trouble, legal trouble. And this is also a requirement if you want to hire a car. So make sure you have your driver's license ready for your trip. And also remember that here in Australia, we drive on the left side of the road. This is super important to know and keep in mind, and I've mentioned it in other videos, but the reality is that accidents do happen, so please remember this. Another big mistake that I see many international visitors make, and you're going to be surprised by this one, is that they don't declare items in Australian border security. And this is a massive mistake. So much so that Australia actually has a TV show / documentary called Border Security, where they investigate people coming into the country and the things that they're bringing in. So let me explain very quickly. Basically, when you enter Australia, arrived at the airport, you're going to have to fill in a form where you declare the items that you're bringing in your bag. And these are items that are restricted or prohibited by Australian border security regulations. For example, certain foods, plants, animal products, medications, firearms, or even proof of certain vaccines, depending on where you're coming from. And if you fail to declare these items and they grab your bag and they find them, you can get in a lot of legal trouble. So my best advice is to get familiar with Australian customs regulations before your travel to avoid any issues once you're here. Another mistake some international visitors make is not observing basic social etiquette in public spaces. For example, when you are at the train station or at the shopping center, here we stand on the left side of the escalator to allow others to pass, not on the right or the middle. And this is pretty important to not disturb those who are in a hurry or going to and from work. Another basic social rule is that we also wait for people to exit before entering trains or trams. We don't push our way in. And please refrain from putting your feet on public transport seats, because there are very hefty fines for doing so. They can go over $200 Australian. And I've mentioned this in many other videos, but it's very important to stress because I've seen it happening. People are tired after a long day of walking and they put their feet, and then the inspector comes in and you get a fine. So be sure to watch that. Now, probably many of you are watching this and thinking that all these things are common sense and basic good manners, but the reality is that we all come from different cultures, backgrounds, so it is not the same in all countries. Another mistake many tourists make when they come to Australia, especially for a visit, is that they leave a tip for absolutely everything. And the reality is that here in Australia, we don't have a tipping culture. This is because hospitality workers here receive a living wage, so tipping is considered optional and is generally only done if you think that you've received exceptional service. But again, this is a discretionary practice, not mandatory. It's up to you. Now, the next mistake many people make when they come to Australia is disturbing wildlife, such as attempting to touch or feed kangaroos or other wild animals. This is a huge mistake and something that you shouldn't be doing because it can be dangerous for both the animal and yourself. Wild animals can actually become very aggressive when you get too close, and feeding them can also disrupt their natural behaviors and diet. So my best advice is to admire them from a safe distance and refrain from attempting to interact with them. Now, having said that, many people coming to Australia for the first time, they go a bit overboard with the worry about encountering dangerous animals, to the point where they don't really get to enjoy their trip, which in my opinion is completely unrealistic and a massive mistake. While it is true that Australia is home to very unique and potentially dangerous wildlife, such as snakes and spiders, most animals here pose no threat to humans unless you disturb them, as we said before. And another thing that many tourists don't know, especially those who worry so much, is that you actually have to go out of your way to see wildlife here. You have to go to more rural areas or even animal sanctuaries. So my best advice to overcome your fear is to educate yourself on local wildlife here in Australia and take common sense precautions to help alleviate any unnecessary fears that you may have. Now, the next mistake on our list is swimming on beaches during periods where it's prohibited or swimming outside designated areas. I'm not sure if you know, but many beaches here in Australia experience strong currents, rips, or the presence of jellyfish in the water, especially during certain times of the year. So ignoring warning signs and swimming in prohibited areas can cause you serious injury or even death. And tourist drownings, believe it or not, are actually a thing here. So I highly recommend getting in the water only if you know how to swim and only in designated areas. And please follow safety instructions and warning signs when you are at the beach, etc. Another unfortunate mistake many tourists and visitors make, and I've seen it firsthand, and that's why I'm talking about it, is that they go hiking or they go camping, they go to a park, they have a picnic, and they don't take the trash. They litter the whole place. If you go camping or hiking here in Australia, especially in Australian national parks, you'll likely see that rubbish bins are not readily available. And this is because there's an expectation that you'll take your waste with you, that you're not going to leave it behind. The fact that there are no rubbish bins doesn't mean that you can leave all your waste behind and litter the whole place for someone else to clean. Conservation and looking after our environment is super important here in Australia. And again, I know this sounds like common sense, but unfortunately it does happen. I've seen it firsthand. So please don't do so because it's disrespectful and we won't have any issues in telling you off. Now, another massive mistake tourists make when they come to Australia is that they don't wear sun protection. And sometimes you see people there at the beach, especially tourists, roasting like chickens, sunbathing. And in many instances, perhaps they're not wearing sunscreen because you see them then get up and they're completely sunburned. And the issue is that many people don't realize that Australia's sun is very, very harsh. It's super spicy. We have very high radiation levels. So not applying sunscreen and not wearing a hat when you're here can actually lead to painful sunburns and increase the risk of skin cancer. So my best advice is to use sunscreen with a high SPF and reapply it regularly and wear a hat and sunglasses, especially if you're going to be spending time outdoors. Another pretty common mistake amongst those coming to Australia for the first time is that they don't bring warm clothing because they think that it's always hot. And it is true that Australia is well known for its warm climate, but the reality is that temperatures in this country can vary a lot depending on the region and time of the year. For example, if you're coming to the southern regions, such as Melbourne or Tasmania, here we have much cooler temperatures than in the north, to the point that during the winter months, it actually snows in some parts of Victoria or Tassie. And even if you're going to Sydney, especially during the winter months, I highly recommend bringing warm clothes. Now, I know many tourists who actually come to Australia and they leave the country without having gone to a foodie match. Or in some instances, they don't even know what foodie is. And in my personal opinion, this is a mistake because this is a huge part of the Australian culture and it's a very unique sport to Australia. So if you have enough time and you want to do something beyond the typical tourist activities, I highly recommend going to a foodie match. It's an amazing experience to immerse yourself a bit more in the local culture. Another mistake many people make when coming to Australia is that they overlook Australia's indigenous culture. And if you didn't know, this country has a very rich indigenous heritage, dating back tens of thousands of years, including Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and traditions. So if you really want to learn about Australia, I highly recommend taking the time to get familiar with Australia's indigenous history, arts, and perspectives. There are many Aboriginal guided tours in major cities, so you could definitely check that out. Now, something that many people coming to Australia don't know is that Australia is a super multicultural nation, which is reflected in its diverse culinary scene, from fresh seafood and the popular Australian barbecue and meat pies to multicultural dishes influenced by Asian, European, and indigenous cultures. So once you're here, instead of limiting yourself to eating what you usually eat at home, I encourage you to get out of your comfort zone and go and explore and try all the different foods from different countries that Australia has to offer. You'll find lots of amazing flavors and very, very high quality ingredients. Now, speaking of the Australian food scene, another big mistake many international visitors make when they come to Australia is that they get their coffees from places like Starbucks, which they're all right, but the issue is that you can get that coffee anywhere in the world, and they don't go to authentic Australian cafes. Because if you didn't know, Australia is actually renowned for its high-quality coffee culture. So next time you come for a visit, don't forget to try the amazing Australian coffee. My favorites are the flat white and mocha. Another mistake is not knowing restaurants' opening hours. If you're from countries like Spain, Italy, or South American countries, it's very likely that you're used to eating very late at night, between 8:30 to 11 p.m. Well, this is not the case in Australia. So don't make the mistake of expecting that restaurants will be open at 10 p.m. for you to eat, because it's very likely they won't. Most restaurants here in Australia open at 5:30, 6 p.m. and the kitchen closes between 8 and 9 p.m. maximum. We have early dinners here, so make sure you consider this when you're making your plans for eating out. Another thing that many tourists and international visitors are not aware of is that Australia's major cities, particularly Melbourne, are home to a growing rooftop bar scene, offering stunning views of the city and the beach, delicious cocktails, and a super lively atmosphere. So don't make the mistake of not going to a rooftop bar when you're here. It's a nice activity to do in the evening, and you'll get to feel a bit more like a local. Now, if you want to know more about what it's like to live, work, study, and travel here in Australia, I highly recommend watching these videos here and here. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe to keep supporting the channel so I can keep bringing more content for you. And thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.